This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the AIPIS show for accredited income property investment specialists and those who aspire to be. If you're a real estate, mortgage, or financial professional, this is the place for you. We'll explore innovative investment analysis, sales, marketing, and income-generating strategies for the most historically proven wealth creator, income property. Learn from the experts as they show you how to build a better business and a better life.
It's my pleasure to welcome Jenna Weinerman. She is with Updater, and they are an app that has a lot of moving data. People use it to plan their moves. So they generally have the early information, maybe about 60 days before people actually move. So we're going to really dive into this topic of migration and talk about where people are going, if it's really happening, is it really what we think? I mean, for months I've been saying, even before it was happening, I was predicting that people would leave big cities. But is that really happening? Is it really true? And what kind of numbers are involved and which cities are involved? And when they move, where are they going? So we're going to answer those questions and more today. Jenna, welcome. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm doing well. How are you today?
It's great. It's good to have you. And you're coming to us from the Jersey Shore, right?
I am. I left New York City actually due to the pandemic, and I'm just sort of temporarily. This is perfect. I'm temporarily living at the Jersey Shore.
Fantastic. And, just maybe, tell us what Updater is first. And if you want to go to the next slide for that.
Sure, you got it. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. I represent Updater. I'm our VP of Marketing. I've been with the company for 7 years. And what we do is we offer an app to help people organize and complete all of their moving related tasks. And when you think about moving, there's a lot of things you need to do, from tackling your internet setup to insurance to booking a moving company. It's really complicated and a big headache. We help people with that. And at this point in time, what we're going to be talking about today are reviewing some striking migration patterns due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have insight into around 33% of all U.S. household moves. That's the number of homes that are actually leveraging our technology for a move. So we're going to talk.
That's a big number for a survey to get 1/3 of the market. That is huge. So we're going to have some good data here, folks.
Yes, absolutely. We actually took a random sampling of about 1 million moves to talk about from March through September 2020. And that's what we'll be analyzing today.
Okay, fantastic. And if you want to flip to the next slide, that'd be great. But, Jenna, since your story might mirror what we're talking about today, do you want to just share quickly your personal story? Because you made that move yourself. So it's pretty fitting.
It is totally fitting. I'm happy to. So I am a New Yorker. I've been living in New York for 12 years. Updater, our company, we're headquartered in New York. We also have a few offices around the country.
And when you say New York, you mean the city, right?
Yes, I am an Upper West Side resident right in Manhattan. I'm maybe 2 blocks from Central Park. And one of the, triggers, if you will, actually happened for me with Central Park is I saw the hospitals being built in Central Park. And in March, at the time in March, we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what we know now today about the virus and the pandemic. All we knew was that it was airborne and it's killing people and it's really scary. And the doctors and nurses and the hospital and frontline workers in New York, they were doing everything they can. But as you know, our city was underwater and it was really scary. And New York is a city where, for me personally, I take the subway to work every day, as most people do. When you go to a grocery store, they're tiny and they're packed in and they're just like, little neighborhood stores. And to be in a city where there's a virus that's really unknown and it can kill you, and to be running around the city, we were all wearing gloves at that time. It just felt really dangerous to be there when I was fortunate enough to have another place to go. Yeah. So what I did at the end of March, I left New York and I just packed up a backpack and I moved here to the Jersey Shore, which is just a family home that we have here. And it was really sitting empty in the spring. And, most people come here in the summertime. So it was really sitting empty. So I just moved in with my backpack and I've been here ever since. And, it's a really interesting time in New York. I have been able to go back once, and everyone was wearing a mask. Everyone was being safe. The restaurants, the businesses are reopening slowly and in a safe fashion. So I would feel safe going back at this point in time, but I really just enjoyed being here for the summer. So what's interesting about my story, and you're going to see some of this in the data today, is that I may have moved, but I didn't actually have a relocation event, right? So there's a big difference between people on the move and being mobile versus actually relocating in the way that it would.
You're stealing my thunder, because that's one of the questions when I'm going to pick at your data that you're going to share, I was going to ask you about all the wealthy New Yorkers that just went to the Hamptons, for example, or Jersey. They didn't really move, in quotes, right? And so you're still paying rent on your place in New York, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I own my apartment, so I'm paying my mortgage, and they do not let you out of that.
Yeah. And you didn't even go into forbearance. I would think that would be an option you'd really want to consider for something like that.
Well, my apartment is my home, and I don't want to leave it. I don't want to lose it. I want to go back. I want to recontribute to the economy, but it did feel a little scary for a while. And simply because I was in a remote beach location, it was just really comfortable for me to be here for the summer. But not everybody, actually what we will see in the data today is not everybody was able to go to a beach. I feel beyond fortunate to be able to be in this position. Right. But a lot of people, you'll see that New Yorkers actually dispersed across the country, which is really interesting. We'll look at that.
Good. Let's dig in. Thank you for sharing your personal story, though.
You're welcome. I'll keep you posted as I move back. Question number one, right? It seems that people are moving like crazy during the pandemic. Is this true? There's been a lot of anecdotal evidence. The answer to that is yes and no. So what we're looking at here is macro level migration. As we talked about the difference between mobility versus actual relocations, yes, people were on the move 100%. But as it related to permanent relocations, what you see here on the right, this is actually a chart of the move volume that we saw, meaning every move is counted as one, and we're looking at total volume across the country compared to seasonality expected levels. Moving is a seasonal business. People move when the kids are out of school. They move in the summer. It's also the summer real estate market is when things are hot. So we're looking at a seasonal trend here. And you could see that most of this line chart is actually below the 0% line, which means that nationwide move volume did drop. We actually saw a 32% drop the week of March 16th, which was totally in line with the first shelter-in-place orders. We saw it drop a little bit further as the shelter-in-place orders started to extend into April and into cities outside of New York. And typically this would be a time when volume rises and is leading up to the summer moving season. And it can often rise as high as 20%. Moving did pick up in July and August, but I would say that it didn't fully recover. You see a big spike there around Labor Day. Labor Day weekend. That is not an anomaly. That's pretty normal. It's the end of the season, and Labor Day moving weekend is a big moving weekend for many. I mean, it's when leases end on the 30th of the month. And it's generally like a big moving weekend because it's a holiday. So you gain an extra day.
Sure. What we're talking about now is nationwide moves from anywhere to anywhere. We're not talking cities to suburbs, cities to rural, or anything like that. We're just talking about the overall moving industry.
Correct.
Or moving activity, I should say.
Move volume, moving activity, great way to put it. Absolutely. So this is just overall volume throughout the course of this pandemic. The drops that you see, you saw that one in April that we talked about. That was when the shelter-in-place orders really started to kick in. You see another one in mid-July, early August here. That was when there were major spikes happening across the Midwest. So maybe next time I can overlay this onto COVID cases, but you would see the big drops actually happening around when COVID cases are taking place, except for that last spike there, Labor Day weekend, and the drop that comes right after it. Those events are actually just sort of balancing each other out. There was so much volume Labor Day weekend that after that, it was a little slow for the first week of September.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did have an uncharacteristically long home sale season. You have seen real estate prices and bidding wars happening all across the country. And just in the last few weeks, it's really starting to cool off as inventory is slowing down. Work from home is continuing, and work from home, we'll talk a little bit about this, really can mean work from anywhere right now. And that's what I'm doing. is my story. And that's what a lot of people around the world and around the country are doing as they're starting to realize I can work from anywhere. Should I really stay here? What do I want from my life?
The interesting thing, Jenna, about that is that, the technology's been around for years to do that. It's not like it's new tech, right. It's just that everybody has adopted it and accepted it. And I think there are a lot of good things coming out of the COVID crisis. And one of them is that it has forced people to adopt things that are, just more efficient, more convenient, better for the environment. Just better. You don't need to have all these in-person meetings. I kind of miss in-person meetings. It's like, tell me about any conference on any subject, I'll go just because I want to see some people again.
Right. I know. Are you getting a little Zoom fatigue as well?
Oh, definitely. And I've definitely got COVID fatigue. I mean, I think a lot of the world has got that, where they're, feeling somewhat scammed as to the intensity of this crisis. But, that's maybe another topic. So, yeah. Right.
Absolutely. So to your point, right, work from home is continuing. More companies are adopting it. There have been a number of tech companies who've come out and said, we're going to continue work from home permanently. Some of them have extended it into summer 2021, et cetera. So we'll continue to see that trend on the rise. And we're also in a world of gig economy where a lot of people are working from home, and freelancing is becoming more and more popular as well, which is from home. So we're going to see some spikes in areas that we may have not seen before. And we'll talk about some of those today. So besides a drop in national move volume, what else did we see? These are just 3 additional national trends that I wanted to share with you. What you're looking at here at the top is the distance that someone moved. And again, this is fully national. So most moves are in fact local moves. And what you see in the bar chart here, this is the breakdown of how many people moved 0 to 10 miles, 10 to 100, or 100 plus in 2020 during the pandemic months. And the 100 plus mile moves last year accounted for 28% of the total. This year, 23%. So there was a national drop in people moving over 100 miles, which is interesting. The biggest increase in gains were in the 10 to 100 mile category.
Yeah, interesting. And by the way, Jenna, some people will be listening to audio only, so I just want to kind of help them understand what we're looking at a little more if they're not watching on YouTube and looking at the visuals. So basically what we're looking at here, folks, is moves from 0 to 10 miles make up about 52% of the moves in 2020. And 10 to 100 miles make up about 24% of the moves. And over 100 miles, like Jenna said, 23%, roughly. And then the people, I guess, are they moving to something else they own or something that they're renting? And 78% of people are moving to something they own, right? That's moving to.
That's right.
And then 21%, roughly, these are rounding, moving to another rental. So that's interesting. And what I take from this is that the 100-mile plus moves, those were corporate relocations, probably a lot of them, to another office or moving for another job in general, right? And so that's why I guess you said that's unchanged, or it's down?
It's actually slightly down compared to last year, and the 10 to 100 mile category is slightly up. Yeah. And just to put it into perspective, our average move across the country is 11 miles. And that's a very local move, right? If you think about
Is it 11 miles this year or always historically?
That's a great question. I need to check with my data team on that one.
Okay. But the answer is, 11 miles can get you out of San Francisco or out of New York or out of downtown LA. You don't always need to move really far to get out of a mass transit area, an elevator situation, which are the 2 danger spots for COVID, or a civil unrest situation with the riots and such. But, okay. Let's move on.
Which is a great point about civil unrest. We have this last stat here on this slide, which is the question of why did mobility spike? Why are people moving during this time period? And some of these answers here are working from home, a change in care responsibilities, meaning you're caring for someone during COVID that you might have not anticipated caring for. Mortgage affordability. This is something you're all really familiar with, is the fact that the mortgage is historically low rates right now, and it's more affordable than ever to buy a home, although down payments are more expensive because the home prices have risen, but the monthly payments are more affordable. It's making people want to own. And then, of course, as you mentioned, safety concerns. We've had a lot of social unrest in cities this year and safety concerns related to COVID. So all of these influences are coming together to really influence where people are going in this country.
Absolutely. Okay.
So we have another question here. Some are hypothesizing that people are leaving the cities, but what does the data say? You know, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, moving companies coming out saying we're busier than ever. A lot of local coffee shops saying more people moved in than we've ever seen in small towns, et cetera. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence here, but let's talk about what the data says. So we actually took a look, just to answer this question at a really high level for you, is we took a look at the top 5 cities by population. Those cities are New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, and Houston. And we analyzed, did those cities experience a net gain or a net loss during this time period? And what's interesting is New York, as the number 1 city in the country in terms of population, also experienced one of the largest losses as it relates to raw volume of moves and people leaving the city. We're not shocked by that. That the anecdotal evidence is backed up by the data now. We have it right in front of us. So out of the top 5 cities...
So New York lost 11,700 people, and these were permanent moves. But what isn't counted is the people like you and all the rich folks who are hanging out in the Hamptons. Those are not counted in these numbers.
Correct.
Right? And what we don't know yet, Jenna, is a lot of those people may turn into permanent moves when they realize how much they like it outside of the city.
That's right.
If the city doesn't reopen and you can't go to a Broadway show, if you can't go to all the great restaurants, if you can't experience the whole point of being in a city, then what's the point, right?
It's a really great question. And just to clarify one point here, there were hundreds of thousands of moves into and out of New York during this time period.
Right.
This just
is a net migration.
That's right. Exactly. So we're looking at some pretty big numbers out of New York City. We're looking at losses from LA and Chicago, and out of the top 5, rounding it out, we have Dallas and Houston in terms of population size. Those cities, both in Texas, experienced a gain during the pandemic. And we'll talk more about what's happening in Texas. So what we actually did was, it's a little unfair to talk about net gains and loss as it relates to overall move volume, because some cities are bigger than others. So we actually indexed this and took a look at the net gain relative to each city's population. And what you see here on this list, and I'll read this out for everyone just listening here, is we have a top list of metropolitan areas that ranked as the top 10 biggest gain during the pandemic relative to their population size. So relative to its population size, our number 1 inbound metropolitan area was Greenville, North Carolina, followed by Tallahassee, Florida, Las Vegas, Nevada, Denver, and Spokane, Washington. And those round out the top 5 here. And it's just really interesting when you look at the map, you're looking at a lot of warm destinations in the Southeast here that gained some new residents. And we're looking at some cities that you're not used to seeing on this list, like a Spokane, a Greenville, or a Reno, Nevada. You typically wouldn't see their names pop up, but relative to their overall population size, they received an influx, and that's worth calling out.
Right. And that's really interesting because that gives you kind of a per capita growth rate, which is very interesting. And none of this surprises me too terribly much. I used to own property in Greenville. That's a charming little town. Tallahassee, I can see, Florida is so business friendly. Las Vegas is picking up all the California moves. But Las Vegas, I lived in Las Vegas for a year and a half. I didn't like that city much. It really is 3 cities in one. Vegas is a very unusual circumstance. It's what everybody thinks is one city. It's the Strip, And then the second one is the slummy parts, which is a huge swath of Las Vegas, unfortunately. And then the nice suburban parts like Summerlin and Henderson, where all the Californians are moving. So it's a very mixed bag. But I'm not surprised. All of these are good places. Wilmington is a charming place. Raleigh is nice. Spokane, Denver, Phoenix. I lived there for 6 years. So all of these are like good quality of life places, I would say. Maybe except Las Vegas, except that just picks up the Californians because it's an easy move. And,
right.
It's decent quality of life if you're in those suburbs. So, no, that's not surprising to me.
Yeah. I mean, the big notable here for me on this list is 3 of the top 10 are in North Carolina. And North Carolina, we've talked to some Charlotte media recently to tell them what's going on in their market. These markets are hot. Charlotte, Raleigh, they're great places to live. I even have friends in New York who've moved there recently. Not surprising to see those on the list, but just worth calling out.
Well, the nickname for Charlotte, North Carolina, where we've done, hundreds of transactions over the years in my real estate company, is halfback city, because people leave New York, they go to Florida, decide they don't like Florida, so they go halfway back. And so, so Charlotte has the distinction of being called halfback city. So
I love that. I've unfortunately only been to Charlotte once, but I had the most charming, fun weekend when I was there and absolutely loved it. Great place. Okay. So that was relative to the population. Net gain overall, this is not going to surprise you. This is based on total inbound moves. This is raw moves we're talking about here. You're going to see your biggest cities on a list here. So what we're looking at is net gain, cities that had a net gain overall during the pandemic in terms of raw number of moves. Our top 5 are Washington, D.C., Baltimore. And again, we're looking at metropolitan areas. So we're talking about D.C. and Baltimore. Dallas, that would include Fort Worth, et cetera. Los Angeles, Orange County, New York City, and Houston. So DC, Dallas, LA, New York, and Houston were our top 5. And 3 I've bolded here, just worth mentioning, is looking at the percent growth year over year. Dallas, we're talking about 38.5% growth. San Francisco, we did see people moving to San Francisco during this time.
That's the shocking one to me. I can't believe it. And Chicago too, but you're talking about the MSA.
That's
right. So the San Francisco MSA probably includes all of Silicon Valley and all those suburban areas.
Right. The East Bay. Absolutely. Yeah. So, and of course, you're going to have to account for the fact that people are moving in and out of cities regardless. Most moves, as we talked about earlier, are local moves. So you're going to see San Francisco zip codes be the destination zip codes on some of these address pairs, right? So it's not shocking to see your top MSAs be your top cities here. But I do want to point out that there was growth in Dallas, San Fran, Denver year over year.
Folks, what you're seeing right now or hearing right now, if you're only hearing it, is that you really can never just take data at face value. You have to think it through and think what's really happening here. For example, Los Angeles, that MSA, includes Long Beach and Orange County, right? And,
Correct.
Santa Ana is the county seat for Orange County, right? So people aren't moving into downtown LA, I would imagine, right? But they are moving to the suburban places. So they might leave the higher density area of LA, like they're leaving New York and they go to New Jersey or the Hamptons. And so then they're going to Orange County or Long Beach or something to live in a more suburban environment. So that doesn't surprise me. And then when you look at Washington, that one's interesting. Washington, even though it's definitely a city, it's a low-rise city. So, you don't see skyscrapers in Washington, D.C., and you do have the government there, obviously. And whenever there's a lot of stimulus, there's something I've been teaching my listeners about what's called the Cantillon effect, based on this economist, Richard Cantillon, which is the idea of the people closest to the money get the richest. And so whenever there's government stimulus and handouts, everybody runs to Washington, D.C., like they did during the Great Recession. Yeah. To go and get their piece of it and to lobby the government for it. And so, if you really think this through, this is not that surprising. So, yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So let's talk about net loss, right? So the same way we looked at net gain relative to population, we're now looking at net loss relative to population.
Okay.
So these are small, potentially, or large cities or their MSAs, that lost more people than they gained, and the biggest losses relative to their population. 3 of these top 10 are located in Texas, number 1 on the list being Odessa, Texas. I know that Texas, particularly in Odessa, there was a lot of COVID cases this year. The city was hit pretty hard. So I'm not surprised to see that topping the list. I'm also not surprised to see San Francisco on our list here. So obviously more people left San Fran than left Odessa because of the population. But relative to the population, you have San Francisco as your number 2 city on the outbound MSA list relative to its population, even higher than New York. So New York might have had raw number of outbound more than San Fran, but relative to the overall metro area, San Fran ranks number 2 on the list.
Because New York has a much higher population. So the list here is Odessa number 1, San Francisco number 2, Boston number 3, New York is 4, Detroit is 5, Madison, Wisconsin 6, Waco 7, El Paso 8. And part of that might be the crackdown on immigration with El Paso, I would imagine. So that's, again, kind of an outlier you really have to think through. Miami, not too far from me, that's number 9. And Provo, Utah, number 10. Now, that one actually surprised me. Provo is a really pleasant place to live. I don't know.
There are some funky trends happening in Utah. A lot of people are moving to Salt Lake City right now. And, there's also some hypothesis that tech workers are moving to Park City and wanting to be in some of these mountain towns. The data doesn't totally back that up. It does back it up for certain markets, but Provo is one we didn't dive too deep into.
Yeah. And that goes to the quality of life area concept if you're moving from Salt Lake to Park City, right? Because you don't have to be in Salt Lake City, but Park City, is a beautiful area, right? So it's a different concept. Okay.
Yeah, very interesting. And then, of course, we have net loss overall. Like we talked about, this is just raw numbers. And you saw DC on the net gain list. You also saw it on the net loss list because it's one of our largest cities. And like we said, most of the moves happening are local moves. So we're looking at, Dallas, San Francisco, and Denver being some of the largest cities on this list for outbound as well.
Okay, let me make sure I'm reading your chart correctly.
Okay.
You have Washington, D.C., Baltimore is number 1, and it says plus 20%. I'm rounding, by the way, so 20% year over year. But the title of the chart is top 10 outbound MSAs.
Right.
So does that mean the outbound are up 20%?
That's right. That's exactly right. So outbound moving in Washington, D.C. is up 20%. It's also possible at the same time for inbound moving to be up 20% year over year, because that just means that more people moved into or out of Washington, D.C. So overall, that's sort of a relative number to overall move volume.
Let me just remind everybody, or maybe we didn't mention it at all. Let me just tell everybody the way Jenna is getting a hold of these statistics is based on people using the app to turn on their utilities and to arrange movers and things like that, right?
Yeah, essentially. What we do is we work with real estate companies all over the country. So brokerages, property management companies, and we sync into the technology systems that they use. And those companies choose to invite their clients to use our app for their move to set up all their services, right? So we're looking at overall move data and move information for the entire country. And the people who then choose to use our app can go on to, use all of our technology here. But overall, we're looking at moving trends at a higher level, regardless of whether they used our app or forwarded their mail or used us to set up their internet, for example. So, Jason, we talked earlier about, in preparation for this, about, what cities are making headlines and why. We talked about national trends now. Let's dive into which of these cities are notable. I know we want to talk about New York, so I sort of set that up for us first today. Let's talk about New York City. So the COVID-19 effect on New York City. So what we saw was, and this goes back to the conversation we just had about inbound and outbound growing. We saw inbound moves to New York drop year over year, and we saw outbound moves grow by 20%. So when both of those things happen simultaneously, you have an exodus. And that's what we're seeing in New York City. Now, New York has been a net loss city, not by much, but a net loss city for the last 4 years, according to our data. But the loss actually tripled during the pandemic. And that is where we that's where we see the exodus. Fun fact, of the New Yorkers who moved to a different state, the top destinations were Florida and Connecticut. And there was a higher than average increase, particularly in New York, of moves over 100 miles, 41% year over year. So what you're about to see on the next few slides as we talk about this is that New Yorkers actually did go very far. So San Francisco residents like to stay in California. New Yorkers dispersed all over the country during this time period, and that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, so where did they go? Long distance speaking, what we're looking at on the screen here is a map of the states that New Yorkers moved to. Not surprisingly, we have New Jersey topping the list. That was my exact path. I'm in New Jersey right now. California, we're looking at number 2. And then 3, 4, and 5 are Florida, Connecticut, and Texas. I want to point out Florida and what Jason, the numbers that you see here in terms of year-over-year growth, this is from New York State to Florida State. There's a 91% year-over-year growth during this time period. Connecticut, 141% growth. Wow. We're going to dig into that one in just a minute. Yeah. And Pennsylvania, you're about to see on a metro side, Pennsylvania and Philly, the New York to Philly corridor, that is hot right now. Yeah. So we're just looking at a state map right now. Let's turn that into cities.
What I must say, what I am surprised is California being number 2. That does surprise me because, you would think that, the trend that was already happening, as you alluded to, Jenna, is that people were leaving New York already. They've certainly been leaving California as well. The high tax rates are pushing people out, the business unfriendliness. And so COVID has accelerated that a lot, especially if it's a high density area. But yeah, let's look city by city.
Right. We'll look city by city. It's hard to tell at a state level, considering how big California is, to sort of dissect that a bit. Okay. So what we're seeing here in terms of metro areas. So if you were living in the New York metro area and you moved long distance out of New York, where did you go? And this map is showing cities all over the country. So we have New Yorkers going to Washington, D.C., no surprise. To your point, Jason, about California being on the list, you have LA and Orange County being number 2.
That surprises me. So people leaving New York City are moving to LA or Orange County. That's the number 2 move for them. And the number 1 move is Washington, D.C.
It could be people going home, right? There's this concept of going home. You talked about a halfback before, but there could be Californians living in New York and they said, whoa, this is a little scary right now. I'm going to go home where it's not so bad. LA was not quite as bad from a COVID perspective at the beginning, early stages.
Yeah, well, lower density, yeah.
Right, and you can spread out a little bit there. So our top MSAs here for New Yorkers to move to were Washington, LA, Philadelphia, 88%. So the New York City to Philadelphia moves increased 88% year over year. Great news for Philadelphia. A lot of people moving in, housing prices going up, et cetera. Chicago and Atlanta with a 63% year over year growth. We also see cities on the list that are a little further. We're looking at San Francisco, like LA, Miami, Dallas, Charlotte, rounding out the top 10. So in terms of New Yorkers moving, as I mentioned earlier, they dispersed. You can see it here on the map. They went far. And that just speaks to the fact that New York City really is a melting pot. And if there were people perhaps going home or looking for a better quality of life during this time, or wanting to move to cities that are perhaps warmer, you see a bunch of warm destinations on this list.
Right.
That's just speaking to the diversity of New York City to begin with, in my opinion.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay. And let's specifically focus on Manhattan. I'm a Manhattanite. I had to throw this in here. So of people who did not move within Manhattan and they left but stayed local, where did they go? Number 1, Brooklyn, not shocking. Number 2, Jersey City. Number 3, Long Island City. Number 4, Stamford. And number 5, Hoboken, New Jersey. I just want to call out one here for Stamford. The Manhattan address to Stamford address increased 150% year over year in terms of growth. So Stamford is experiencing a major influx of Manhattanites, not Brooklynites, not Jersey City, Manhattanites. And, we've talked to some people in Stamford and I have some friends there and I said, watch out. New Yorkers are coming in, and they're prepared for that. And the one thing that's really worth noting is we did a sort of a deeper dive into Connecticut and found that obviously Stamford is an interesting home it's an interesting place to live for New Yorkers because it's a very easy commute back and forth to New York. It's a one-shot train. Right. However, some of the cities in Connecticut that require 2 trains or a transfer, those experienced influxes as well. And that made me think, like we said, we have to think about the data. I was thinking about this and our team was, and what we realized was people who think that their work from home will be able to continue moved further to the 2 trains. People who felt like they might need to go back to work stayed in Stamford. So Stamford's a great location in case you have to go back.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about San Francisco. Interesting one here. We saw this city on the number 2 loss list based on population size. That's a huge statement for San Francisco. And San Francisco, just like New York, has also been a net loss city for the past 4 years, minimally. But again, losses tripled during the pandemic. And we added a line chart here for anyone who can't see this. What this chart is showing is since 2017, what has been the delta between moves in and out of San Francisco. And you're seeing, a reverse hockey stick here of, San Francisco sort of holding strong as a very minimal net gain loss city, meaning the same amount of people were moving in as leaving, slightly below 0, falling on the loss side. And then as the pandemic has struck, you see a very large drop off from 2019 to 2020 in terms of the actual loss that the city is experiencing right now. So really, really interesting to see San Francisco, just losing some folks. And if we look at where they are going, we pulled the same maps here that we just talked about for New York, state by state. So people from San Francisco, what states did they go to?
They're going to Texas. Why am I not surprised?
Yeah, they're going to Texas.
Texas has been the pick for Californians for so many years. And I bet a lot of them are moving specifically to Austin from San Francisco.
Should we check it out? Next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. We're looking at, now these are the top 10 MSAs that San Franciscans moved to. What's interesting, I want to come back to Texas, what you just said, but look at where these cities are compared to New York. Every city on here, most of them are West Coast. So for the listeners online, we have where San Franciscans moving: Los Angeles, Sacramento, Seattle, San Diego, New York, Stockton, California, Portland, Vegas, and then you have DC and Austin. And what's really interesting about this is San Francisco residents stayed West Coast. New Yorkers spread across the country.
Right. Well, I think the New Yorkers figured if we're going to move in the bargain, we might as well try and get better weather.
I agree.
Yeah. So, and everybody likes lower cost of living. So, yeah. Okay.
Especially coming from either one of these 2 cities.
Absolutely. They're outrageously overpriced.
Right.
Yeah.
And to your point about Austin being one of the top destinations, you're absolutely right. There it is as the number 10.
Yeah. I had dinner with Tim Ferriss right after he moved to Austin. And, he famously left Silicon Valley to live in Austin, and it's a very similar vibe. It's just a much less expensive version of Silicon
Valley.
Yeah.
Right. I have to admit, super jealous you had dinner with Tim Ferriss. I'm a fan. I have a signed book of his.
I must tell you something interesting. Our dinner was I kid you not, it was a 4-hour dinner. He wrote the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, The 4-Hour Chef, The 4-Hour Body.
Yeah. Right? And, that's so funny.
And then we had a 1-hour dessert after that. So at another place. So yeah, it was a long dinner.
I'm really jealous. He would be on my top list of people I'd want to have a 4-hour dinner with.
Yeah.
Maybe one day. Tim, if you're listening.
Yeah, there you go.
Call me. Okay. So we talked about where San Franciscans are going, and then let's talk locally, just like we did for New Yorkers. Check this out. All destinations in the top 10 that San Franciscans move to locally are obviously within California. The top 20 cities that San Franciscans moved to were also within California. We're looking at, obviously no shock here, within local, we're talking about San Francisco downtown addresses moving to San Jose, Sunnyvale, Oakland, Mountain View, Fremont, Santa Clara, Dublin, Pleasanton.
They're just
Walnut
moving
Creek.
to the suburbs. They're getting,
Exactly.
I mean, they're not moving to inexpensive areas, but they're still less expensive than the city proper. Right. And they're right there. So, they still have all their same contacts, their same social circle.
Yep. Exactly. You might just change your nail salon and your pizza place.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. So what I also wanted to do, we talked about New York, we talked about San Francisco. I just wanted to sort of pinpoint some other notable cities that you might find interesting. So we're just going to jump around the country a little bit here, if that's okay.
Sure.
So let's talk about Boston for 1 second. So Boston has been a net loss city again for 4 years. However, the losses doubled during COVID. Not as severe as New York and San Francisco, but we did see an exodus. And you can see a line chart here of the net gains and loss, and Boston moving toward a more severe net loss in the recent months of the pandemic. Boston was also the third greatest loss relative to the population. You remember Odessa was number 1, San Francisco number 2, Boston number 3. And fun facts, where are Boston residents going if they are leaving? They're going to New York, number 1, Washington, number 2, and Providence, Rhode Island, number 3. Providence, interestingly, experienced an 84% growth year over year from folks from Boston. So just wanted to...
I'm surprised they would go to New York. I mean, if you're talking about New York City, that does really shock me.
I thought the same thing, and then I started digging into this concept of home, right? New York is just a melting pot, and there could be people from Boston. There are many people from Boston living in New York and vice versa. They're so close together. And, Boston is a little bit more quaint, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking for that big city lifestyle, you might be moving to New York. Okay. That's Boston. We have our same type of concept here. We're going to look at Vegas. You called out Vegas as a really interesting one earlier in the show. Vegas was our third largest net gain on the national list relative to population. And what's interesting is net gains in Vegas have been steadily increasing year over year over year. And the widest gains, basically the gap of gain, increased during the pandemic significantly. And you can see that right here in this chart. We're looking at a line chart of the last few months of 2019 and into the pandemic months of 2020. And we see a huge spike in Vegas in terms of gain around April into May and June, which is when mobility started to pick up. People were moving to Vegas. And overall, we saw a 51% growth year over year in Las Vegas in terms of inbound moves. And if you're curious where they're coming from, which I was, they're coming from, as you called it, really West Coast areas. You've got Los Angeles, number 1, San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle, and then Chicago is your little outlier, but some West Coast big city folks moving into Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, no state income taxes compared to, if you're doing well, you're going to pay 13.3% in California, maybe 16.8% soon. Right. It's, yeah.
Yeah. Think carefully about where you're moving, folks. Yeah. Okay. So that's Las Vegas. Just really interesting data here. I want to call out Denver, and my next slide is going to be about, we're going to talk a minute about Denver and a minute about Austin. Denver and Austin have been on the map, metaphorically speaking, for a while as very hot cities to be. About 10 years ago, they were, I would call them maybe tier 2 cities that were growing. These are now tier 1 cities that have experienced huge relocation booms over the last 10 years. Denver's been a really hot mover destination for 4 years in a row. And it actually this year ranked number 11 on the national destination list, up 2 spots from number 13 last year. So Denver and Austin growing neck and neck, hand in hand. They're both doing really well, and they're both benefiting in terms of resident growth during the pandemic. And interestingly, only 2 of the top 20 are origination cities into Denver, meaning of all the cities that sent residents into Denver, only 2 of the top 20 were within Colorado. That means 18 of the top 20 were from outside of Colorado. People are moving to Colorado for a better quality of life. They're moving in from all over the country. And here's a full list. I thought you'd find this interesting. Net gain to relative to population again in Denver. We have where are people moving from? Number 1, like I said, Fort Collins, Colorado. Number 2, New York City. So, when you look at the data about people leaving New York and people where they're going, you also then need to move over to the destination cities and look at the inbound. And that's what we're doing now. It's like, okay, if all these people are moving to Denver, where are they coming from? They're coming from Fort Collins, New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Colorado Springs, San Francisco, Dallas, DC. But they're coming from all over, and they're being attracted to Denver for a lot of reasons. It's just a really hot market, and it has been for quite a while.
Yeah. Now, Denver's a great city. I love Denver. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Now, you're going to see something very similar in Austin. I'm flipping a slide here for those listening. We're now looking at Austin, Texas. Again, hot mover destination for 4 years in a row. Austin ranks number 14 on the national destination list, and 7 out of the top 20 origination cities were from within Texas. The other 13 came from all over the country. Very, very similar patterns to Denver. And if we look at where they're coming from, number 1, Houston into Austin. Number 2, Dallas into Austin. Number 3, San Antonio into Austin. So a lot of folks within Texas are moving to Austin, which is really great, keeping it local there. And then outside of Texas, you have San Francisco, New York City, and Los Angeles. So there are a lot of folks moving into Austin from all over the country, same as Denver. And I just wanted to call those out as just being 2 cities to keep your eye on. I mean, as if it wasn't already, but in terms of investment, I think your viewers will appreciate
absolutely. that. The problem with some of these cities, they may be great markets, but they're too expensive to provide good cash flow. So, for example, 8-10 years ago, that was about the last time we did any business in Denver. The last time we did any business in Austin was maybe 14 years ago. They both got too expensive.
Right.
And so the rents never keep up with the prices, and so those rental ratios stop working after a while. But they're both great cities, and I mean, compared to LA and San Francisco and New York, they're a bargain.
Right. Interesting. I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to come back to the next slide. I want to skip ahead based on you're talking about cash flow here. We did put together a list of cities to watch in terms of long-term growth, as well as for immediate impact to local businesses. And on this cities to watch list, we chose a combination of cities based on year-over-year growth and inbound moves, pandemic-specific growth relative to population size, multi-year relocation trends, housing and rent affordability, and also the job market in each city. So for long-term growth, we have 3 cities to watch. We chose Denver, Raleigh, and Phoenix. So curious your take on those. And then
the only ones that will work in there are maybe Raleigh. We haven't done any business there in a while. On the second list, Charlotte's the only one that'll work. But years ago, we did do a lot of business in Salt Lake City. It just also got too expensive, though. Yeah.
Right. The second chart here that you see, for those listening, we called it a for local business. This is a city list to watch for local businesses, meaning there is extreme growth in these cities during the pandemic, which can impact local businesses, impact school districts, impact health systems, et cetera. So this is more just like not necessarily for investment growth, but more so for, hey, local economy, watch out, Stanford, Charlotte, and Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to back up one slide. I just want to hit that while we were talking about it and just back up here. So question is, what should our country expect moving forward? What do we want to pay attention to? And I pulled some data here from a few different sources, including our own mover data that we've gone through. Essentially, I'm predicting that we're going to see a little bit more of the same for this year. However, I think more people are more willing to move right now than they were earlier in the pandemic. Why? Earlier in the pandemic, A, we didn't have a grip on how long this was going to last. And B, we didn't know who it was going to affect, where it was going to affect. People were fearing job loss. And if you're not fearing job loss as much right now, or your business has rebounded, you might be more willing to make a risky move, not risky, but make a move. So I do think that if people were going to move, the relocation boom is, in my opinion, just getting started, right? We're going to start to see shifts. So a few bullets here that we're sharing.
I completely agree with you, by the way.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Great. And here are just a few reasons why we feel this way. Remote work continues to be an opportunity for Americans to relocate wherever they want. It's not just work from home, it's work from anywhere.
Right.
And 54.7% of newly remote workers want to relocate over 2 hours away or more from their current location. That's from an Upwork study of remote workers it was just recently released, I think a week or two ago. But that's over half of people who are newly remote want to move over 2 hours away. That's a great sign for moving. It's a great sign for new economies. It's a great sign for all these cities that we just talked about. Second bullet here is Americans who needed a new home for a new lifestyle, they have moved. If they needed to make an immediate move, they did. And there's been a lack of home inventory at the moment, which is leading us to believe that the summer sales season slowing. Bidding wars for limited inventory may continue, though, because the inventory is slowing down.
And what people need to realize about that is that, and this is not apparent to a lot of people who just look at the data, is home sales can only be accomplished based on the amount of inventory available. Right. So there may be a massive amount of buyer demand, but if there's no inventory to buy, then the sales stats lag and they don't look good, but that's not a reflection of the market. That may be a reflection of an extremely hot market. So,
Right. Or you could have the exact reverse of that in New York City right now, where 10,000 apartments are on the market and there's no buyer demand.
Yeah. Don't you want to sell your place?
It's funny you say that. I'm actually from Philadelphia and I had been planning to move back to Philadelphia anyway. The pandemic has sparked that interest and my apartment is up for sale. Nothing has happened to it. So that's why I was saying earlier that I am excited to go back. It's been sitting on the market for over 100 days.
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah. And what's funny is in New York, that's not normal. My apartment, I have a studio apartment with a washer dryer and 3 walk-in closets. That's unheard of. And it's been sitting on the market for 100 days.
How much is that? About $1.2 million?
My studio?
Yeah.
Actually, I put it up for $459.
Oh, wow. That's incredibly inexpensive.
It's incredible.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And studios are ranging from, I would say, $375 to $500 right now. So it's right smack in the middle of the pack, but it's amazing. Yet it's still sitting, and it's just a bad market. Yeah.
I hope it improves for you.
Thank you. And it's one of those things. This is just a funny time. And like I said, all these trends, we're seeing them now. Are they going to continue? Are they not? How is this going to shift? How is it shifting cities and economies in the long term? Only time will tell. We really need to be patient with this.
Yeah.
So another stat here, we're talking about rent. So what can we expect moving forward? Rents across major cities are continuing to decrease with record-breaking declines. So if you did want to rent my apartment instead, that's available as well. But the 5 largest decreases year over year in rent: San Francisco rents are down 20%, Oakland 19%, New York 15%. Seattle 14.9, and Washington, D.C. 14.8. So if you are looking to rent an apartment right now, or you want to get rid of your home and rent something downtown and do the reverse, now would be the time to invest in a rental and lock in a long-term lease, as many of those property management companies let you do. We also have mortgages are continuing to be affordable, right? We know that the rates are really low. The prices will continue to drive down payments. It's funny, I had a conversation with my parents the other day, never knew this story. They left their honeymoon early many years ago in the 80s, left their honeymoon early to lock in a 14% interest rate. And they wanted to get home to make sure that they locked that in because they didn't want to miss out.
You don't want to have to pay 16%, Yeah.
Right, exactly. And look at where we are today. So if there was ever a time for you to purchase or rent, give it a shot. It's worth it now. So, and then additionally, 36% of Americans say that they're concerned about losing their jobs right now. And that study came out just a month ago. So 36%, I think that was down from in the 50s earlier in the pandemic. So there's a little bit more stability, but still for 36% of people to be concerned, more risk averse folks, maybe it's not the right time for you. So again, there's pros and cons, there's the pluses and minuses, there's different trends that are pulling in different directions. So I do think that the current mobility spikes are a precursor to a longer, more sustained relocation boom, but only time's going to tell.
Yeah. Very interesting, Jenna. Anything else you want to share with us before you go, just to wrap things up?
No, that was it. Unless you have other questions, we could talk all day about this.
We could. I love this stuff. You seem to love it too. It's really fascinating for sure. But again, I think what you just mentioned, time will tell. But I do think that the long-term trend is out of the big cities. And you mentioned Park City before, and I'll just share an interesting anecdote that my listeners may have heard. There's a well-known author, John Nesbitt. He wrote a series of books entitled Megatrends and Megatrends something, something, something. And he talked how he, I think in the 90s, had moved to Telluride, Colorado, sort of comparable to Park City, Utah, right? It's a ski town, very nice place. And he was just amazed that he could live in such a nice, what he called quality of life location. And he didn't have to have his whole operation, his whole office, his research firm in LA or New York or San Francisco. He could live in Telluride. And Jenna, the big technology of the day that allowed him to live in Telluride, wait for it, you ready? Mm-hmm. Federal Express.
Wow. Sending documents back and forth. Wow.
That was the big technology of the era that allowed him to live
Amazing.
there. I don't know if he moved in the late 80s or early 90s, but it just goes to show you that people are really adopting and taking advantage of these technologies that allow them to live wherever they want. Back in 2012 on the show, I said, that I've been requoted a lot on this. I made the statement, geography is less meaningful than it's ever been in human history. And when I said that 8 years ago, I was referring to autonomous vehicles and how the self-driving car would revolutionize our life. Mm-hmm. That's been a little bit slow in coming, but it is coming. And, when I say geography is less meaningful than it's ever been, what I mean is what's considered, or what was considered at least, prime geography, expensive cities, San Francisco, New York, LA. People just don't have to live in these places anymore. And frankly, I don't think they're that nice. I think they're great places to visit. I love going to New York City as a tourist, but I wouldn't want to live there. It's just,
It requires a special personality. Yeah. I've done it for 12 years and now here I am living at the beach. I can see the ocean and I run on the beach every day. And that is just a different lifestyle. Running in Central Park is different than running on the beach. And try everything. You know what I mean? Like you've shared in this segment just now, you've moved all over the country. And at the end of the day, if geography is truly less important, it opens you up to so many more possibilities. Yeah. And that's what I think, if there is any kind of silver lining at all related to the pandemic, it has opened people's minds up to, where do I want to be? What do I want to do? Do I want to continue working for this company? Do I want to be closer to my family in case something happens? And, it opens your mind to, it's allowed us all to pause a little bit. And, and as it relates to moving, and, a lot of people are rethinking this.
Americans, and I assume people all over the world are the same, are really rethinking what makes up a good location, a good place to live. Yeah. And they're making new decisions. They're voting with their feet, and we'll see how it all turns out. Jenna, we'd love to have you back in the future to give us an update on this stuff. Do you want to give out a website or anything? I know Updater is like an invitation only type thing, but
sure. Yeah. Everyone, if you're moving and you need moving tips or you want to access, we do have some free tools available. You can book your internet with us online and a few other features, which is fantastic. But if you're interested, updater.com. And if you are a real estate agent, a property management company listening, we'd love to work with you and partner to help ease the friction around moving for your clients and residents. So give us a call from a B2B perspective.
Excellent. Good stuff. Jenna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is a blast. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.